What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJawProjects.com, and it's kind of weird, but for some reason, I've never had Cory Kerr on my channel. What's up, Cory? How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, man. It's funny because it feels like we've been in each other's circle for a long time, and for I don't know why, but somehow it just didn't happen. But I'm glad you're finally on because I like watching your shows, and I know sometimes you watch mine, and it's cool stuff.
Yeah. We've been circling each other for a couple of years now, so yeah, it's good. I should have more people on my show, but it's just I don't know. I do so many of them that it's just like, oh, it's that time again. I got to do another one. Years ago, I was going to do like an interview style thing, and I did a couple of them, and then it's a lot of work.
Yeah, the toughest thing is just trying to schedule them.
Yeah,
I think more than anything. But you got your thing going. I love the 48-hour art check. If people don't know, that's a video that he does usually, I guess these days, with Mike Emmerich. It used to be with Joshua Kemble, and sometimes it's with Scott Circlin, which many of us know.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's always an interesting dive into what you guys are working on and stuff. Where would you like people to find you, by the way?
They can just myname.com. So just corykerr.com. And,
awesome. And
yeah, they can. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. So if they want to hunt me down there.
Cool. Yeah, and there's a couple links in the description as well if you guys want to go check his stuff out. There's one for his YouTube and then one for his website. And yeah, so other than that, I wanted to I guess we could probably start with a basic question of, I think it's interesting how, if people don't know you, it's kind of interesting how you kind of started off at one point. You were doing art and stuff, and then you took a huge break, and then you kind of found your way back to it. I'd love to hear a little brief overview of that.
Oh man, I don't know. It's I mean, I was one of those kids that drew as a little kid, and there were a couple adults that I allowed to get inside my head. And so like at one point, my dad taught high school wood shop. And so there was one of the high school art teachers that dropped by the house, and I was really excited about what I was making. So I showed it to him, and he's probably got his own problems, because this is a weird response to like a 6-year-old, but like he just looked at it and was like, it's not good enough. And then he like walked away. I was like, oh, that's weird. And then I was so excited. I saved up all my money for like a sketchbook. And it was just like, I don't have one close to me, but it was just like one of those black sketchbooks. Right. And before I was able to draw in it, it was like $5 or $6 to like a 6 or 7-year-old. That's a lot of money. And so I was super stoked about it. And somebody was like, oh, you better not draw anything bad in there, because that's a really nice book. And then that just got inside my head. And so it freaked me out. And so like I didn't draw a single page in that sketchbook. And after just some weird stuff like that, I just kind of stopped doing it. I mean, I took some high school art classes, but I was kind of just messing around a little bit. And then I ended up going into kind of marketing. And so I went to school, and I thought, hey, I'll try this art thing again. And so in college, I was an art major for one semester. And because I had never really built up like any resilience to anything, I immediately saw that I was at the bottom of the class. Like I was like the worst artist in the class. And I was like, I'm gonna do something else. And then anyway, so I went into communication and spent years in marketing and advertising. I did graphic design professionally. I did video and photography. And so I was kind of always like dancing around actual illustration, but never really doing it. But I would incorporate it a little bit here or there into like designs, but I mean, I not a lot, not consistently. Like I didn't have a sketchbook. I wasn't drawing all the time. It was whatever. Anyway, long story short, I got hit by a car on my bicycle, and then a month later, I got rear-ended, and so I had like 2 cases of whiplash that were like built on top of each other, and so I spent a ton of time. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, like it seems like a medieval torture device, but they strap this iron ball to your head on a chain, and then you just have to sit there while it like tries to straighten out your neck. And so I was spending hours every week, going to the chiropractor, trying to get healthy again and whatever. And so I started reading blogs. I came across Jason Brubaker's really early blog, where it was the Remind blog before he had a YouTube show and everything. I came across him and a few others of that ilk, like the early days of Chris Oatley, before he started the Oatley Academy. And I just started there was some stuff that was going on in my marriage where I was like, I got to do some stuff for myself, because I've been kind of like not doing anything for myself. And so I decided to start a webcomic. I said, I should learn how to draw. I've always been interested in comics. I've always been interested in drawing. And so I started a webcomic, and I just decided I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this for 10 years. We'll try like a decade long experiment. If I'm not good at the end of 10 years, then I'll do something else, which I don't know why I decided 10 years, but I wanted to give it like enough of a shot to where I would have an actual chance, rather than just say, I'm going to try this for like 6 weeks. And if I, and so I've got 2 more years on that 10-year experiment. Because that was 2012. So I did that. I had a guest page on Axe Cop at one point, and but I have kind of like hobby ADD, and so the reason that I think I'm on the show today is because you posted, am I a bad comic book artist if I want to branch out and do some other stuff? And I just thought, welcome to the club, my brother. Cause like, I don't know. I draw stickers, and then I do an animation, and then I'm going to do a comic, and then I'll do a whatever. And then I'm going to try to do some experimental film. And then for me, it's self-medicating. And so I feel healthier with an outlet than I do just being entertained all the time by the media. So so that's kind of my journey. Most people don't start drawing at 32, but that's kind of what I did. So
yeah, but it's I've always been surprised when I've heard you talk about how late you kind of started drawing, because then I look at your illustrations and I'm like, he caught up pretty quick. Like, it didn't take long.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, you always see your own flaws and stuff, and I've still got a lot of catching up to do, but it's a little misleading, because I was a professional photographer and videographer for a number of years, and a professional graphic designer for like 12 years. And so like a lot of the stuff, like I still had to learn how to draw, but like a lot of the stuff, like compositionally from a design standpoint, if you're composing a layout or a shot or whatever, very similar. I wouldn't say it's the same, but there's a lot of applicable skills that are adjacent to illustration and design. If you're looking through a viewfinder, or if you're shooting a film, or if you're laying out a magazine advertisement or whatever. And so you start to, so it's not like I was starting cold. It's not like I was an accountant. And then I was like, I'm learning, I had adjacent applicable skills that I was able to have a jumping off point from. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense for sure. And, I think design, that's one thing that I always feel like is almost like a hack for making comics, or really anything, is if you have any knowledge of design or sense of design, I feel like that alone can kind of make even bad art look good, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm saying that's what you're doing, but like that, it's definitely helpful. I think that's really good, no matter what level you're at.
Well, I mean,
So
you look at like professional illustrators that are like making bank doing it. A lot of them can't draw well, you know. I mean, if you were to critique the actual illustration from a craftsmanship standpoint, a lot of it isn't like they couldn't make it at Marvel or DC, you know, but the compositions are really strong and the ideas that they're trying to convey are really strong.
mhm.
And ultimately in certain fields, craftsmanship is trumped by the ability to communicate effectively. And so, yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying about design. I think it's often a blind spot for a lot of artists who can render really well, but it's like, but what are you saying and why are you laying it out that way? Like it looks amazing until you like look at it and you're kind of confused, and you know, it's like they've rendered the details well, but not the structure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and that's even with the as I always go back to the image guys, you know, even with them, you know, I think of you know, McFarlane, and he's all about the details, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
but he also did have a really great sense of design. He didn't have the
Yeah.
best, you know, he didn't draw like Jim Lee. He didn't have the correct anatomy all the time, but the design was on point, you know.
Right.
Um, and we got Fitz Factor in here, says, "Wow, the sticker designs on his website his website is awesome."
Oh,
So
thanks, man.
I agree. And so one thing you mentioned was this kind of creative ADD, and you know, this is something that has plagued me as well. It depends on how you look at it. I say plagued, but some people might. You could also look at it as a positive. But you know, there's something to it, I think, uh, and I think when you try a bunch of different things, everything that you try, you can bring some of that to whatever like your next thing is. Do you find that?
Oh yeah. I learned that really early on after I got my bachelor's. I was doing video and it was a lot of like really boring stuff like corporate training stuff. And and then I was like, I should teach myself how to be a photographer. And so I just bought a camera and started reading the Strobist. I don't know if anybody in the audience has heard of him, but he was a dude that was like, is like, hey, all this like snobby elitist stuff where you've got to buy really expensive equipment, like we can DIY this. And so he would like make all these like fancy lighting setups with like cheap stuff. And so I kind of read that. And then somebody at work was like, hey, what are you doing? Because that video that you just made was like a whole nother level. And I was like, oh, really? And he's like, yeah, that was nothing like what you've made here before. And so he didn't know I was doing that, but I started to learn that like when you add skills, it informs all of your other skills. And so in learning photography, it made my video compositions better, you know, and learning graphic design, because I took 100 level like intro to design class. That was 100% of any of the training I had for the first 12 years of my career. The rest of it, I was just like, let's figure out how people are doing this. And so every time I add a new skill or I try a new experiment or I fail miserably at something, like I try to look at it and figure out like why it's working or why it's not working. And then the neurologists call this a rich connection network. And so like your ability to learn new languages increases with the number of languages that you learn, right? Somebody who knows 2 languages is going to have a much better time learning a third one than I am, because I barely know English, right? But like there's people, like I had a buddy from Holland who like he knew like 6 languages. And I was like, how do you know 6 languages? And he's like, I don't know. I knew a couple, and then once you know a couple, you just learn the rest. But it's kind of the same thing as like you start making connections in your mind, and everything in your mind is interrelated and interdependent. There isn't anybody out there that can separate parts of their life from other parts of their life, and so when it's kind of like somebody who claims to be religious but is dishonest at work or something. It's like, it's not really how that works. You can't just be a different person. Your mind is the same, your brain is the same. And so when you add a skill, a rising tide raises all boats. You're going to get better at other applicable skills. And so there was a study done years ago that a number of programmers it's a very analytical field, right, where you're writing code, do something either visual or auditory that's very creative on the side. So there's a lot of programmers that play guitar or ukulele or draw or watercolor or whatever. And what they're finding is that a holistic approach to your brain, rather than a narrow myopic focus on a specific skill set, is very beneficial. And focus is good, but I'm going to be a better coder if I watercolor. That's basically what they found. And so I'm a better illustrator if I know how to shoot a little bit, if I can do whatever. And a lot of my buddies like Josh, I mean, I think his punk rock stuff and his recent folk album, I think that's going to make him a better cartoonist. I mean, like every time anybody does something like that, our whole being gets better when we improve in something. So it's not like a isolated thing.
That's interesting. I've been thinking a lot actually about a similar thing to that, because I was actually looking up stuff today about like art therapy and just the role art play in that kind of world, and they're saying like, and you don't even have to be somebody who's skilled at art, but they have like these art therapy things, and these people they have whatever deep issues that they have, and they'll start doing art and they'll start making connections faster of the things that they need to learn and figure out, which blows my mind actually, but I wonder, like, because I feel like I've been in art therapy since I was in nursery school,
Yeah.
Like, because I've been doing this something creative my whole life. And, sometimes people are like, how do you deal with this? Or how do you deal with that? And I'm like, well, art is a big part of it. Something about that helps me with everything else,
Yeah, I agree. I've been self-medicating with art for 8 years now, and I'm much happier. But it's interesting because, in my master's program, I studied the link between boredom and creativity. And there's a lot of really fascinating studies on that. And it's interesting that your mind, the worst thing that you can do to your mind is to be bored, because it hates it. It hates it so much. And so the neurologists say an idle mind finds a toy, right? And so basically, like, if you have a problem to solve, don't sit down and watch TV, right? Work hard on the problem, then you can step away from it. And that's why most people get really good ideas when they're falling asleep, or really good ideas when they're in the shower or going to the bathroom or mowing the lawn, because those are really boring activities, right? And so your brain is like, this is not engaging. Like, what's the biggest problem that I can try to solve? And creativity is problem solving. And so, like, it's creative and it's weird. And so, like, I don't need to think that hard about easy problems, but like, you have a blank comic book page and you've got some dialogue. That's a huge series of very complex problems for your brain to solve, because you're creating something from nothing, or maybe you're creating something from chaos. But either of those situations, it's not just a problem, it's a series of stacking problems. And so in doing that, you get better at everything, right? And so I knew a guy who was something very analytical. He was a mechanic, right? A lot of mechanical process, but he's one of the best pianists I've ever heard. I mean, he's just an incredible composer. He could just sit down and just make beautiful music on this piano, very unrelated things. But this dichotomy is a myth, that there are creative people out there and there are analytical people out there. what I think is that there are creatives who have survived the crappy educational system that we've got that just beats creativity out of people to try to turn them into drones and robots and automatons. And there are those that have fallen victim to that system that think that art isn't a career, or whatever. And they're like, I'm going to go do something that, where you can make money. It's like, well, look at anything in the world that is a product and it has been designed and illustrated and made nice and made functional by people who think about things rather than people who follow instructions.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you can see, I think the best example of that is like when you see something that's designed badly, like I went to websites for different things, different companies. Some of these are very substantial companies, but you could tell their website looks like it was made like, 15 years ago or something like that.
Right.
And it's like, even though it's a substantial company, if their website like you think about it like this, like it probably has the same functionality as the similar kind of company that has a nice looking website, but because you go on there, your experience on there is going to be like, this is a crappy website, it doesn't do this when I click this, but it probably does. You have this psychological view of like what this company is like because their website sucks,
Right. Yeah. And I used to work for a company that did themed environments. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like environmental design. And we do all kinds of crazy stuff. But the guy who owned the company, he would tell restaurant owners, he said, if you let me theme your restaurant, your food will taste better. And I think that's true. I mean, you walk in and the presentation of it is a big part of it. Another thing beyond your mind is your perception of reality. If something smells a specific way, that affects your taste. If something looks a specific way, it affects how you hear it. There's a video of a guy saying fa, 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 and ba, ba, ba. And it's interesting because they put both of those up on the screen at the same time. And the audio track is the same. But depending on if you're looking at him using the letter B or looking at him using the letter F, you will hear what you're seeing, even though the audio doesn't change. So like everything that we do is interdependent, and the way that we perceive the world is mixed that way as well. And so anybody who says that design doesn't matter, or art doesn't matter, illustration doesn't matter is an idiot, because they just don't know how we perceive the world. I mean, that's how we experience the earth. I mean, that's how we experience each other, is filtered through the perception, and the perception is driven by aesthetics. I mean, that's what aesthetics are, is the way we perceive the world. So
yeah, that's some interesting stuff. That's one thing, as I was looking into the therapy stuff, I'm like, I love whenever there's like a video of anything really, and it talks about like, the neuroscience behind it or something. There's always some really interesting stuff that the brain is pretty amazing. I don't know.
yeah.
So speaking about the brain and learning things, one thing that you have some experience in, and I don't know if you're still working in this kind of environment now. I think you've said you are. I don't remember, but you've done some teaching in your time.
Yeah. I still teach professionally as my day job.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you feel, I'm asking a leading question. I'm sure I already know the answer, but do you feel that you learn a lot by teaching?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think for a number of reasons, it's the way that I operate, because I did a video years ago, Learn, Create, Repeat, that was basically talking about the process of, you learn something well enough to do it, but then you understand it and ingrain it deeper by being able to articulate that to another person so that they can understand it. And then you learn another thing. And so there's this cycle, and it's all kind of based on this quote that Einstein said, where I know a lot of people that are very smart. They're much smarter than me, but they can't explain concepts in a way that I can understand. And I don't think they understand that thing as well as they could if you can't articulate it. And so for me, I don't have a good. I've probably got some learning disabilities that I'm unaware of, but there are certain things that don't stick in my mind. And so I've spent years trying to figure out how to make stuff stick. And for me, one of the best things, and there's actually, since I've started teaching, we have like professional people come and talk to us about the science of learning and the science of teaching and whatever. And a lot of my assumptions and habits that I've kind of developed over the years have been like, backed up by this science. But the idea is that if you have an experience, it can go away really easily. But if you articulate the value of that experience to someone else, it actually becomes ingrained in who you are. And so, I mean, this is why journaling or blogging or things like that are really important. And so this particular study was talking about doing hard things. They're talking about grit, right? The idea of the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. People who say, I can't do that yet versus people who say, I can't do that. And the idea is if you do something difficult, that in and of itself won't teach you that you can do difficult things. You have to do something difficult, and then you have to articulate the value of that difficult thing that you did to someone else. And that actually, in articulating it, it gets it outside of your body, outside of your brain, and you realize it into the world. And in doing that, you're able to say, oh, actually, yeah, that's true. I didn't know how to do that, and I worked hard, and then I knew how to do it, and I did it well, even though it was really hard, and I failed like 6 times before it happened. If once you know that and you articulate that to another person, you realize that the only difference between what you want to do and where you are today is time and focused effort, right? And so it's kind of that. And so for me, I use teaching as a way to remember things. And so like I'll learn, like I did 100 days of animation really early on. I just decided one day, I want to learn how to animate things. And so I didn't know how to use After Effects. And so I said, I'm going to do it every day for 100 days. And I made 93 videos in a row. And a lot of those are me just pissed off, just saying, I broke again. I screwed it up another time. Right. But like, there's a lot of value to me personally in articulating when I did figure it out. I figured out how to rig up a leg, and then I explain it, and I take the time to do the visuals of it and to do all that stuff. And then I remember it, and then I don't have to like go back and take notes. And if I do forget, I've got a video and then I can go watch where I was explaining it. And so sometimes I'll remember that I once knew something, and I'll go back and watch a video of me teaching me how to do it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And to your earlier point too, I think it's interesting. There was a preacher actually that I listened to a lot at one point, and one thing that he said that I thought was interesting was basically like even in theology, like it can get pretty heady and pretty scholarly. It can get pretty deep. And he would say if you can't, like what you learn, if you can't like explain it in a way where like you could write like a children's book about it, like explain it to a child, then you don't really actually know it. Like you have these things in your head, but you don't truly actually know it, which I thought was interesting. Also, I think it's kind of interesting too that we have like this outlet of like YouTube, because you do teach a certain course or courses or whatever it is, but you can't like teach everything you learn necessarily. But on YouTube, you kind of can. And another thing that I think is really neat is that I've learned through teaching on YouTube from time to time is, you always read a book about how to do something, or watch a video series or something, and they'll give you like these formulas, or they'll give you like the 3 steps to do this or whatever, like all these kind of things. And when you start making YouTube videos, you realize, hey, I can make all that stuff up. Like I
Yeah.
can make my own, formula or my own 3 steps. And it's kind of fun because you're like you have a different experience of how you do it. Like, I don't know, like the way I do it might be a different way than somebody else's video or whatever, but
Yeah.
both can work, and I think it just teaches me that, also similar to what you were talking about, almost like with reverse engineering and stuff, like it teaches you a skill that you don't really get if you never taught somebody something, like to come up with your own formula, and to like you were kind of alluding to, is that reverse engineering. Like, people have taught themselves how to mix music just by listening to other music and seeing,
Right.
okay, where are these frequencies, and trying to replicate that in a song, things like that. It's just it's really amazing what you can learn just by observing. And I don't know, I don't even know where I'm going with that, but that's the kind of things I've learned so far by
Oh
teaching.
yeah. And I use a technique that I call reverse engineer posts in a lot of my teaching, and I make my students do it because I feel like in articulating why something works, you understand it better. Because a lot of people will go into a class and they're like, I like this. Well, why do you like it? Because it is good. Okay, well, that doesn't actually mean anything, right? Can you articulate why it's good? Can you articulate what could make it better? And they're like, I don't know, I just like it. Well, why do you like this and not another thing? And most people don't. Most people go through the world liking and disliking things, and they never think about it, right? But most people go through the world, being entertained and being consumers of things rather than creators of things, and so that's fine. But if you want to create stuff, you can't just like stuff. You have to know why it works. And so, like taking a piece, like you said, like music or whatever. Why is that song good? I don't understand music theory, right? But my wife is a musician, and she went to school, and she's classically trained opera singer, and she understands music theory. So like I'll have conversations with her, and there's like stuff that I didn't even know was a thing. And then she's like, "Oh yeah, they're doing this," and then they resolve it later, and blah 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 blah. And it's like, it's awesome that there's all these different expertise. But like, if I approach a design or if I say, "Oh, I like that thing," right? And it strikes me somehow, it has some sort of emotional resonance, or some sort of it ticks a box for me or something. I take note of that, because at some point in time, I want to go back and I'll do drawovers. And so I'll say, okay, I'm gonna try to find as many different points of contrast as I can. And so I'll color all the light values green, and I'll color all the dark values red. And then I'll hide that layer and do another layer and say, okay, now I'm going to try all the where's the hue contrast. And so I'll highlight all the warm colors and all the cool colors. And then I'll say, okay, what other? Well, okay, let's do complexity versus simplicity contrast. And so I'll find all the negative space and all the positive space. Okay, let's do figure ground, and I'll find all the subjects and all the background. And then by the end of that, I'll have analyzed something 12 different ways, and I really get a good feeling for how they did it. And it's better than, well, I'm going to copy it, right? I'm going to say, okay, they did a thing, I'm going to try to do the same thing. Well, what happens when I want to make something, but there isn't something out there that's like that thing? I don't know how to do it yet, right? And so reference is great. I use reference all the time, but it's just a very limiting tool, right? And so if I understand like why the human elbow looks the way it does when it bends a certain way, rather than having to find a picture of that, that's helpful. I probably will still use a picture, but I'll understand the underlying structure because I've reverse engineered how it works. I've done drawovers. I've done that type of thing. Or, why does Art Adams, why does his stuff not look like just a wash of black? There's so much ink on the page, but like, how is there depth? I spent a week one time just breaking down an Art Adams piece, because I really wanted to understand how he's doing that. And it was fascinating, just the choices he made of, I'm not going to put a line here. I'm going to put 4 lines here. I'm going to put 4 lines here, and then 4 lines going the other way. And he was able to just change the value of something in such a simple way. And you look at it, and your immediate response is just overwhelm. Like there's so much going on, but it works so well because he's very precise in the decisions that he's making on the page. And so in that way, I was able to reverse engineer that and understand a little bit of like, it sounds stupid to say it out loud, but because I did that with that one piece, I now understand like how one value of ink can be used to create the impression of an infinite number of values from white to black. But I wouldn't have known that if I didn't spend 12 hours looking at this image and doing a bunch of drawovers in Photoshop.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's for all you who have paid attention to my channel, I have the Level Up sketchbook videos, and right there
Such a cool project. I
he
love
just
watching
gave you a really cool Level Up thing. Like break it down, break one thing down as many different ways as you can. Think of the different art aesthetics that would go into that, and yeah, that's great stuff. Another thing that I've heard that I thought was pretty genius was Jersey Droz. He talks about because he teaches, and he talks about some different exercises that he uses to help people make comics and whatever. And one thing that I thought was a really cool exercise was he'd say like, your homework is to go out and take as many pictures as you can, and then bring them back or whatever. And what he would do, he would say, now go through those and start to see like what are the commonalities, between all the pictures you took.
Right.
And this is kind of almost detecting your own style, because one student would find that they did a bunch of like, maybe they did a bunch of extreme shots where it was like a worm's eye view, or whatever eye view, or maybe another one had a lot of straight on shots, but it was capturing some very subtle things like of nature or something, or maybe another person just is really attracted to a certain kind of color scheme or something like that. And you can even analyze your own stuff, which is kind of an interesting practice.
Yeah. I love trying to do that. It's such a fascinating experience to, like, if I have somebody that's struggling, like one of the projects that I make people do is a gig poster. And what I love about gig posters is it's not clear communication. It's not intended to clearly communicate like an advertisement. You're trying to communicate an emotion or a feeling, an experience of what it's like to attend that concert or whatever. So it's very abstract. And for a lot of students who have been in a very literal environment, where everything is like, I see that thing, and so I say it that way, rather than like more of like an Eastern approach to something, which is very symbolic. There's a huge difference in the Bible between the way that Luke wrote and the way that Revelations was written, right? Revelations was written with a very Eastern, and so instead of saying there's going to be a powerful thing that shows up, and they say, oh, there's a dragon with like a bunch of horns and eyes, and and the symbolism of that, And so I do this gig poster, and some people will bring me, they're like, I just don't know. And I'm like, all right, well, let's look at a bunch of stuff, right? And I just have them do the same thing. Collect a bunch of work that you really enjoy. And then, without thinking about it, hey, Scott, without thinking about it, then you take that body of work, do a Pinterest board, do a whatever, right? And gather it all, and then look at it and do exactly what you just said. Try to find like, what is common with this? Oh, I see that there's a kind of a consistent color palette that I like, or I see that there's kind of some unusual like rule of thirds compositions here, or like the line work is a specific way or whatever. And a lot of the stuff can look drastically different, but you find those Venn diagrams where everything overlaps, and it can be really powerful in identifying like what you as an artist are drawn to in that way. So yeah, I love that you said that, because I think that's a really powerful way of self-discovery is not just I like some things and I don't like other things, but like gather all the things you like and see what they have in common, because there's probably something of you in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And something else that I thought was interesting from what you just said too is I like that, I don't know, this idea of like, because I find myself getting into this trap. So I guess I want you to elaborate a little more on it. Is this whole thing of like being too literal? Like,
Oh,
it's so hard to get away from that sometimes. Like you know, say you're assigned to do like a Christmas picture. It's like, how do you get away from the literalness of that? We have so much imagery in our brains, you know, from that kind of thing. It's like, how do I do something different, something interesting, you know what I mean? Or even
yeah.
abstract, like you said, you know?
Okay, can I share my screen real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, let me find. We'll do a little whiteboard session here. Okay, if I were to ask somebody who hadn't had any artistic training to draw a hand, 100% of them would draw a hand like this.
Yep.
Why is that? Because that's the symbol for a hand, and every single one of us has a
Right.
symbol system, right? And our symbol system, it oversimplifies things, because without the symbol system, we'd have a problem. But hands don't look like that. Like there is not a situation where you hold your hand like this, you know, like jazz hands, maybe spirit fingers. But like other
Yeah.
than that, like if you waved at people or tried to pick stuff up or tried to manipulate stuff like that, that's weird. That's weird, right? And so hands are complex, and you've got like different parts of them, and you got the thumb, and they can bend, and there's different things going on, and so there's a structure underneath that. But what you have to do if you want to learn how to draw hands is, before you learn how to draw hands, you have to break your symbol system. Right? What color is the sky? It's blue, right? Everybody knows that. But is it? Sometimes,
Right.
yeah, but not always. Like there are times of the day, or if there's a fire, or if there's pollution, or if the weather does something, the sky is an infinite number of colors, but our symbol system says that it's blue. And so like to get started, you have to like, and I know this sounds, I don't know, stupid and whatever, but like you have to just challenge everything that you know. And so instead of saying like, oh, Christmas. Well, okay, I'm gonna do red, and I'm gonna do green, and I'm gonna have a snowman with a carrot in his nose, and I'm gonna have the snowman has to have his top hat. Then there's gonna be a fat guy with white frills on a red coat, like, and that is Dale actually showed the emoji of the hand, which is literally emojis are exactly what I'm talking about. So, well, first it might be helpful to understand like why we have a symbol system, because it's basic survival, right? And so like
Right.
every way that we perceive the world is based on some sort of biological imperative, which is like built into the animal nature of ourself. Our lizard brain is I need to survive, I need to mate, right? And so survival comes with protection, it comes with food, comes with shelter, mating comes with attractiveness and whatever, that type of thing. Like those are very, and I believe that there's a lot more to humanity than that, and the soul and everything, but like a lot of that is built that way. And so if I look out onto the horizon, right, the reason that I am going to see the lion is because my brain is wired to survive. And so I need to know some things about that. My brain, it does figure ground, which means that things that move, things that bulge outward, things that disrupt the pattern of a background, that must be something that could kill me. And so I see that thing. And we still do this today. Like if you look as you're about to cross the street, you are looking for objects that bulge outward, that are moving, that disrupt the background. Those are cars, because that could kill you, right? And so the symbol system is there because you're processing a huge amount of information every second, all the time. And your brain can't do that. I mean, it would be terabytes of data every millisecond if it was like everything that you smelled, touched, saw, and heard every moment of it. The idea that you're recording everything with all of those different senses is not true. Neurologists has disproved that over and over again. What we do is we simplify it, we perceive it, we interpret it. In fact, if we go back to this, I'll show you how your eye works, because this is interesting. If we go here, let me just get rid of this. So the way your eye works is you have your cornea, right? That's the lens. I'm going to draw this
Yeah.
slower. Okay. You've got the pupil. That's the hole in your iris that allows the light in. So that's like the aperture of your camera, right? And the less light, the bigger your pupil gets because we need to let more in, right? The iris is actually a sphincter muscle that contracts and expands to open this. Okay. And then you have the eye. Okay. And the eye goes back like this. Okay. You have your eyelids and the eyelashes that protect it. But back here, you have like the film of your camera or the camera sensor. That's your retina. In front of your retina, you have your rods and cones. They detect color, but they're attached to the retina. Let me draw the rods and cones this way with blue. Okay, so the blue is the rods and cones. Interestingly enough, when light enters your eye, it comes in, it is blocked by the rods and cones, and about 20% of it hits your retina. So in essence, we invent 80% of what we see. So the actual light that hits our retina and then is turned into an electrical impulse that's then interpreted by our brain is only 20% of the light that enters our eye. And so in essence, what we're doing is we're taking the clues, we're simplifying it, and then we see stuff. This is why optical illusions work, right? Is because our perception of reality is different than reality itself. It's how we filter it and how we see it. And so this symbol system that we build, it makes it so that we can function. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to walk down the street or drive a car or chew gum and talk at the same time, right? But the symbol system is really, really bad. Now I feel like I'm lecturing. I feel bad. I've been talking for too long. But the symbol system, the symbol system is really, really bad at creative stuff because it is a shorthand and a shortcut to communication. And so as somebody who's creating, if you want to get away from like literal narrative and you want to get into more abstract thought where you're communicating emotions and feelings, then challenge everything to break your assumptions. I was working on a children's book a couple of years ago, and it was taking place in like in the countryside of Japan. This woodcutter that lived with his wife, and so I was drawing all this foliage, and I was drawing bushes. I didn't even think about it. I was drawing bushes as clouds with two leaves on them. Like that way in my mind was the symbol. And I was like, why does this look bad? And I was actually reading an issue of Wonder Woman, and I came across this page, and it just blew my mind because on the edges of the page, the artist had drawn a vignette of inked silhouetted foliage. And what I saw was, oh, I didn't realize that I was giving into my symbol system. Leaves are different shapes, and nature has a pattern on how those leaves are interpreted. And so then what I did is I went to a garden, a public garden, and I walked around, and I really started to detail and understand how plants grew, because some of them are symmetrical and some of them are asymmetrical, but they're asymmetrical in a logical way. And so once I understood like the pattern of about half a dozen different leaf structures, then I went back and I figured out, okay, how can I use a brush to make these happen? And then I developed my own interpretation of nature's pattern. And then from then on, I didn't have to look at any reference or anything. I could just, without thinking, just fill in pages and pages and pages of inked foliage because I had rewritten my symbol system. Because before, my symbol system was bush is fluffy with leaves. Yeah. And then after that, it was like, okay, there are ferns and there are oaks and there are pines and there are, and each one has a different pattern. And so that's what I would say is don't make the sky blue just because you didn't think about it. Like choose a color for the sky. Don't make Christmas green and red just because that's what everybody else does. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do that, but I want you to have a reason for it. And if you can come at it where you have a reason for doing that, that means that you've gone through several iterations. You've experimented a little bit. Mike Emirates and I, on the last 48-hour art check, we had a whole discussion on color, and it was really fascinating to like look at color in comics because, my skin is kind of a pinkish, right? And my hair is brown. But if I'm a character in a comic, I could be blue, I could be green, I could be yellow. And it really depends on like what is being communicated in that scene and what my character is about and whatever. And just because humans look a specific way doesn't mean that they have to look that way.
Yeah.
Right. You distort them too much and it's unrecognizable. You know, there has to be some sort of structure where they're recognizable. I mean, just look at cartoons, and it's not like the people in Gravity Falls don't look like people, but they really don't look like people. But they look enough like people to where you're like, oh, I see. But they've been distorted and abstracted in a way that communicates something that is different than photorealism.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the example of trees or foliage, because that, if you've never tried to draw that, it is extremely difficult. Because if you take the literal approach, trees, any foliage is so complex, it's ridiculous. If you try to go the abstract route, well, that's tough too. Like you said, you might just draw a cloud with a couple leaves, like you said. You know, there's so many ways to approach it. And what I found myself doing, and I think I probably need to do more of what you said, because basically what I did was I just looked through all my comics and I'm like, how the heck does Kirby draw trees? How does, Silvestri draw trees? Somebody, how I want to do it in a way that's easier than drawing every leaf, but I don't want it to look stupid too.
And that's not a bad way of doing it. But I think that should be one of the ways that you do it, because I do that too. I mean, I have up on my wall here. I've got all kinds of actual comic book art that I purchased over the years. And let me see if I can zoom out. Is that this way? No, that's zooming in. Anyway, so there's all this, right? And I use this all the time to like shortcut stuff, because you can't always go take a walk in the woods, like sometimes but I'll look at that, and I think the key to that is exactly what you said. Don't just look at one person. Don't just be like, how does Kirby do it? Say, how do these 6 different people do it? And then you find how you do it based on that,
Absolutely.
But then also, get outside and look at stuff sometimes.
Yeah. I get a little I get trapped though with reference personally, because I've learned how to draw what I see, and that's become a problem. Like, it's either draw what you see and make photorealism, or draw something out of your head and it looks like crazy cartoony. But I have a hard time trying to kind of merge the two, and this is actually helpful, what Dale A is saying. I think Jake Parker is known for kind of illustrating this kind of thing as well. There's that triangle, the real, abstract, the simple. Is that? Yeah, I think it's real, abstract, and symbol. Maybe I think, because that's one of the corners. Yeah. So some stuff does go a little more towards the symbolism. You can create in that way.
Oh yeah.
And then it's interesting. I think a lot of cartoons are kind of between abstract and symbolism, but then maybe you look at something like manga or anime, and that's almost a little bit more towards abstract and real, or symbol and real. They kind of go a little bit more towards that direction. It's interesting when you really analyze the different styles, especially with a tool like that, with the triangle. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And really early on, I was in a program, and somebody was critiquing my portfolio, and it was devastating. But one of the most helpful things is they said, this looks like 5 different people did this portfolio poorly. It's like,
oh wow.
Like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, you're all over the place. You haven't, like, what do you want to make? Because at the time I was trying to be a realist. Like, I love the paintings, the painterly look. I can't paint. I don't know what it is. I could probably learn it, but maybe that's my next 10-year experiment. But like, but I just don't. And that's not who I am. And he said, listen, I've seen a lot of people come through, and it's funny how many of them are not true to who they are, and they're trying to be who they're not, and they're disappointed with what they're not rather than embracing what they are. And that's when I actually was like, yeah, I'm just going to embrace ink. I screw paint. That's not who I am. I'm going to figure out ink first. And so I've been spending a number of years trying to make sure that I can draw structurally well and get the ink down. But it is kind of fascinating, because in that triangle that we're talking about, like, there's not like a right way. It's not like you should be 20% this and 30% this and 50% this. Like, no, you should be wherever it feels right for you. Because if I had a mentor years ago that said, if two people are the same and one of them is not necessary.
Yeah.
I think that's true of artists, and I try to teach in a way that people discover who they are, because I don't want other me's around. I'm already here, and I don't need competition for that spot. And so I don't want them to teach them to be like me. I want to teach them to be like the best version of them. And so, like, whatever spot in that triangle you feel drawn to, then just get really good at that spot.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, like this phenomena you're talking about, kind of how people want to be something and they don't want to be what they are. And that is a really difficult, it's kind of a real difficult journey. Like,
yeah,
because I feel that way too. Like, I don't even know if I have a style, but sometimes people say they can tell my style.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I even like that style. You know what I mean? Like, I know that there's a lot of people I've wanted to kind of my style to be like that or as awesome as that, And sometimes I feel like my stuff, like, I really love, the type of style that, say like Jake Parker or there's another guy who's really similar to him, but like that, like the Calvin and Hobbes and stuff. And like, it's cartoony, but there's enough realism there too, where like there's enough detail that, I don't know, it makes it a little more interesting for me.
Yeah.
But I don't really draw that way for some reason. Like, so, it's like, what do you do? Like, it's a journey, and I don't know where I'm going, but I want to get to somewhere,
Yeah. And I wonder how much of that is, like, if you were to analyze it too much, it just breaks down. It isn't useful. Cause I don't know. I used to think about that a lot. I have massive imposter syndrome. And so I hate most of the stuff that I produce, cause I feel like I'm just a fraud, but recognizing that I feel that way, I can kind of brush those feelings aside. I wasn't used to able to do that, but like I used to hunt for my style a lot, and now it just is what it is. I'm going to make stuff to the best of my ability. I'm going to make the changes that I'm going to make based on what I want to communicate and how. And for whatever reason, people kind of like the same with you. People are like, hey, that looks like your stuff. I even had a colleague recently pull up some stickers. They had seen some stickers on somebody's water bottle, and they took a picture of it, and they're like, hey, did you design these? I said, oh, no, I didn't. And they're like, oh, it looked like your stuff. And so I just wasn't sure. And I was like, oh, it's interesting, because it was a subject I had never done before. It was something I'd never even touched subject wise, but there's something in it that reminded him of what I make. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And yeah, I don't know. I maybe the answer is to focus on anything but style.
Yeah.
Like, focus on storytelling, telling a good story, and your style will be there. You just don't know it or something.
Yeah. I don't even know what style is. I mean, when you really start to break it down and talk about it, what is it? I mean, I've heard it described as it's the mistakes that you consistently make. I've heard it described as, it's the aesthetic choices that you go with. It could be, but all of those feel like dancing around the idea. I think style is this catch-all term that almost has lost all meaning. It's some sort of identifying characteristics that most people aren't able to articulate, like what it is, but they're able to say, oh yeah, like what's the difference between Panic at the Disco and Fall Out Boy? Like they sound different, and I can tell the difference, but like they're very similar. And is that difference their style? Well, yeah, you could say that, but it's also like they do specific things that I don't understand because I don't know music. That somebody who knows music really well could probably articulate, like music theory and application and processing and the way that the album is produced and the type of pedals that they're using or whatever. I don't know, but I mean, it's very similar music, but it also is different enough. And so style is a weird conversation because I've never been satisfied with a definition of it. Yeah. So it's hard to nail down. I don't know what we're talking about.
It's like you can't define it, but you know it when you see it, like
right.
If I were to like describe, take some time to describe like McFarlane's style and then take some time to describe Liefeld's style, those two descriptions might sound exactly the same because they both have a lot of detail. They both aren't that great at anatomy. They both are pretty good at action and design,
Yeah.
But they look totally different,
Yeah. You want a really interesting experiment with that is in my master's, I was kind of forcing what I wanted into the program. And like at one point in time, they wanted me to do an art history paper, and I don't like art history. And so they're like, I want you to analyze and compare, 3 classical artists. And I said, can I compare 3 comic book artists? And I kind of gave them my reasons why. And eventually they said yes. And so I did Sean Gordon Murphy, Jake Parker, and David Peterson, the guy who does Mouse Guard. And though they're very similar, but drastically different at the same time. And so try writing a 14-page paper comparing 3 different images, and you will learn a ton because you can't just say it uses ink. You have to say how and why, and you can't just say it's detailed because you have to say like where and what does detailed mean, and like like what are you doing? Well, for certain people, detail means texture. For other people, detail means you're defining the edge quality. For other people, detail means a pattern that's indicative of something. Like David Peterson does a lot of kind of sticks and twigs that are on the ground. So he has these patterns of sticks and twigs. It's very detailed, but what it is a symbol of the forest floor. Whereas somebody like Sean Gordon Murphy is going to put a thumbprint on somebody's face to show that they've been roughed up or that they've got a beard or whatever. And like, it's all detail, but like, what does it actually mean? I wouldn't ever want to do that assignment again. It took forever and it was really horrible, but I learned a lot.
It's funny as you're saying that, I'm thinking of this one kind of example or whatever. And then I'm thinking, oh, this is actually brings me to something awesome that Cory Kerr said one time. But there's imagine like you're describing, say, the style between one artist and another, and they're somewhat similar, like we've said, but like how much information would you have to put into a computer to make them draw in that style, to make the computer draw in that style? Like it sounds to me like an impossibility. And maybe that is why you want to do stuff that computers can't do, like somebody I know has said before. How do you say that usually? I love that. What do you say?
Do things robots can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. I love the idea of trying to find the humanity in stuff, because if it can be programmed or automated, why would you bother doing it? Just program it or automate it, But like there are certain things that we bring to the world that software can't do. And so that's for me a huge part of art, you know, a way. There's understanding stuff, there's knowing stuff, there's being able to do stuff, and then there's being able to articulate stuff. And if you can get down to the point of explanation and articulation of what the robots can't do and what you bring to the table specifically as an individual to the human race, that probably has something to do with style. You know, you know, like I believe that each of us are individuals and each of us have worth and each of us have value, you know, regardless of your background or the color of your skin or what or your belief system or what you look like or whatever, like or how much you earn or you know whatever socioeconomic or whatever demographic or psychographic information that we like to categorize people and put people in boxes. Beyond all of that, every single person has an individual spark. And I think for an artist, there's a lot of value in trying to dig down and find what that is for you. That's probably a better pursuit than trying to figure out your aesthetic style, because there's something to that. And for me, I've spent years trying to figure out why I do things. I like to make people think. And so that's why my stuff is not super popular, is because a lot of pop culture is kind of surface level thinking. There's some of it that is really good. But I mean, a lot of my work is like, I don't want to give people the answer, but I want to pose a lot of the questions. And so you look at a lot of my speakers and stuff, and it's like, I want people to be like, oh, that's what I'm going for. You know, I want that moment.
And if there's any like defining quality of what your style is, I could totally see that, because even your simple like sticker things, like there's always something in there that's like it's beyond just a catchy image or whatever, you know. And I was thinking before we did this, I'm like, I feel like your stuff is kind of almost would fit in the realm of like editorial illustration, but maybe not even, because that's trying to convey a message. You're trying to make people think. So that's an even interesting thing. I mean, I guess it could fit in that anyways, because an editorial, you know, could be a piece that is meant to make people think, but you know, just interesting.
Yeah. Well, and at one time I wanted to go into editorial illustration because of that fact. And so probably that really informed a lot of other things. But I think the best editorial is kind of what we were talking about earlier, where instead of saying like the article is about this, so I draw this, you know, is you say the article is about this, so what can I draw to add to that? You know, and you make something that like raises the quality of the article because the intersection of the visuals and the written word create something more than just one or the other. That's where I think editorial is really strong, is when it does get abstract.
Yeah, that's definitely, I would agree with that. Van illustration, also known as clay, man, finding a voice is just as tough as finding a style, maybe more so.
Yeah.
I wonder what the distinction between voice and style is, though. Well, I guess maybe there is no distinction. I don't know, but like style, because I feel like voice can be part of style.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, like you like to make people think. I feel like that's more of a voice thing, but it's in your style. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, there's probably a lot of overlap between those two things, I would think. But it's a good question. I mean, I feel like maybe your voice is more internal. It's more intrinsic. It's what is driving you. And maybe the style is how that's realized, the execution of that drive. And so there's going to be a lot of overlap between those two things. I've never really thought about that, so I don't know if I agree with what I just said, but it sounds right now.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting, like that does sound like you kind of described both in the distinction. And when I think of voice, I guess I kind of think of message a lot.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, like that spark, I think is interesting, because I feel like, you know, it's interesting because we're human, you know, and I'm not only about one thing, you know, and you're not either. So it's like, yeah, feel like I like to make people think sometimes too, but that's probably not the overall spark for me. Mine tends to be somewhere in the realm of inspiring people at a very ground level. Like
Mm,
I really like to get people excited, even if they can't draw or can't write or can't do whatever. I still want to show them that they actually can, at
yeah.
that very base ground level, like get them started. Um, I don't know, something about that excites me.
And that's cool. And I think beyond voice and style, there's probably something else to make this more complicated and confusing. I think we each have kind of a calling.
Mm,
Um, and I think we're put here to do some stuff. I don't really believe in like foreordination or predestination where you can't avoid it. It's fate. I'm not a fatalist, but I do believe that like everyone here has a reason to exist. And so probably part of your voice and the way that you execute your voice in the style, uh, you know, could be informed by what you feel like you're here to do, you know, and that can probably change over time. I mean, there have been times where selfishly I'm here to earn as much money as possible so I can survive, and other times where altruistically I'm here to better the community, and those both can be good callings. And
yeah,
so if you feel like you've got a calling to like to help people start and get started, like that's pretty cool. And there's a lot of like rad stuff that can like flow up from that. Especially if you identify that as a thing. Like Jake Parker does talk about this idea of like the mountain, right? Of what it is that you want to be. And he filters all his decisions through there's this far off mountain where sometime in the future he's going to climb that mountain. And every decision that he makes, he asks himself, is this going to get me closer to the mountain or further away? And at some point in time later on in your career, you're actually not heading towards the mountain, you're on the mountain. And so what might have been a right decision to make 5 years ago is now a wrong decision, because
mm,
what would have gotten you closer 5 years ago to the mountain now would actually mean you'd turn around, right? Or whatever. And
mm.
so as your life changes, your calling can change, and some of the insight and whatever you get can kind of filter out. Um,
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. I like how you said that, you know, there's a calling, but it's not like a fate thing. Because I feel the same way. Like, um, I almost feel like if you feel like you know what your calling is, and then you turn it into a fate thing, that's actually a really bad thing.
yeah.
I feel like maybe that's almost that's it's like that dogmaticness or whatever, and I can't help but think of like Nazi Germany when I think of that. Like it's like this is what my calling is now. This is how it has to be 100% for the rest of my life. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't sound right. Something's wrong there. And then also, yeah, I like the idea that it can kind of like change, and it reminds me of story because you can like a story generally, well, the typical hero's journey story is a change story, usually a positive change arc, and it's somebody has a misconception about something, a misunderstanding about a truth of reality, but the reason why they have that is because they learned probably some kind of survival thing at one point, that caused them to survive in a certain situation, and because so they made a certain choice, and so
Right.
now they're applying that choice to everything. And what the hero's journey tends to be is challenging that choice. That's not, you can't apply that to everything anymore, because now this and this, so now you're on like this new change arc. So it's a constant, you might even relearn that same thing in a different context one day too, so you can kind of fluctuate almost. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if you go back to what we were talking about earlier, like we filter our reality through our senses and our experience. And so this tool, this body that we have, right? It changes, and my mind, my brain, it changes, and my experience. Like I experience things by what I bring to the table, right? If I've never seen a spider before, because I'm 18 months old or something, I might try to eat it, because I don't know, right? But at 40, I look at a spider and I'm like, I've had prior experience with this shape,
Where's the blowtorch?
Yeah, exactly. And so as we change with experience and with failures and successes, like the world changes, our perception of it changes because we're actually experiencing it differently. And so it would be really weird to decide like this is who I am and then never alter that. that's a pretty strange thing. I mean, you'd have to be very insightful for that not to be dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we started talking about learning, and I don't know where we ended up, but it's all interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Why don't you let people know once again where they can find you, Cory?
Yeah, just my name, the way it's spelled, CoryKerr.com. And there's a little link there that says find me on the internet or find me on the web or something, and that'll take you to Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. I'm on YouTube. I do 2 or 3 live shows a week. And then I try to post on Instagram. I just did a little animatic in an animation I'm working on. And Twitter's kind of where I wax eloquent. So that's where I kind of process a lot of these weird thoughts I have. I do these big long Twitter threads where I'm trying to figure things out publicly. So if you want to get philosophical or weird, hit me up on Twitter. But yeah, Instagram and YouTube are kind of where my normal stuff is. But just CoryKerr.com.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely recommend all those. There's definitely a lot of things to kind of mine out from all of that. So, once again, thank you everybody in the chat, and thank you, Cory, for hanging out with me. This has definitely been fun. You're always welcome anytime to come on. I'm sure we could have a lot more discussions on these kind of things.
Cool. Hey, I appreciate the invite. It's awesome, and yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome to come on my show anytime you'd like as well. Just let me know.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right, everybody. Thank you once again. And I'll let you know tomorrow morning about, let's see, what time is it now here? It's 9, it's almost 10 o'clock. In about 7 or 8, I don't know, around 5:30 my time, a.m., I'll be having another show. So, maybe you'll be up, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll watch it later, maybe you won't. But
yeah,
that's
and I'll be on Artcasters later tonight as well.
Oh, there you go. Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a lot of places to go here. So thanks again for watching, everybody, and we will talk to you next time.